The moldy chunk of chicken fell from my fork and landed with a wet slap against the white tablecloth, its putrid smell hitting my nostrils like a physical blow. My stomach convulsed as I stared at the green-tinged meat, watching a thread of slime stretch between the piece on my plate and the one that had escaped. 23 years of Thursday night dinners at Marcel's Bistro, and I'd just bitten into something that belonged in a dumpster, not on fine china. Before I start my story, I would love to know what city you are joining me from. Feel free to share it in the comments. Now, let me immerse you in this story. I shoved my chair back, the legs screeching against the hardwood floor. The other diners turned to stare, their conversations dying mid-sentence. My hand flew to my mouth as saliva flooded my tongue, that pre-vomit warning my body had perfected over 46 years. I grabbed my water glass and drained it, desperate to wash away the taste of decay that coated my throat. The dining room tilted slightly as I stood, gripping the table edge. Candlelight flickered across the familiar burgundy walls, the framed photos of Marcel with various celebrities, the brass fixtures I'd admired countless times. This place had been my sanctuary, my refuge after David's funeral, the spot where I'd celebrated my daughter's college acceptance, where I'd closed million-dollar real estate deals over coq au vin and expensive wine. I pressed my napkin against my lips and headed toward the kitchen, weaving between tables of oblivious patrons still cutting into their dinners. A waiter I didn't recognize stepped into my path, balancing a tray of steaming plates. "Ma'am, the restrooms are—" "Move!" I pushed past him, my shoulder clipping the edge of his tray. The clatter of silverware hitting porcelain followed me as I barreled through the swinging door marked "Staff Only." The kitchen's heat hit me like walking into a sauna. Industrial fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across stainless steel surfaces. But it was the smell that stopped me cold, not the aromatic herbs and simmering sauces I'd expected, but something sour and organic, like fruit rotting in summer heat. Three-line cooks froze mid-motion, their faces whipping toward me. A pot boiled over on the stove behind them, hissing and spitting. To my right, industrial refrigerators lined the wall, their doors propped open with milk crates. Inside, I could see containers stacked haphazardly, some with lids askew, others leaking onto the shelves below. My eyes locked onto a prep station near the back. Raw chicken breasts lay scattered across a cutting board, their surfaces filmed with an iridescent sheen that had nothing to do with proper storage. Next to them, a box of romaine lettuce wilted brown and slimy, liquid pooling underneath. A date stamp on the box read 2 weeks prior. "Ma'am, you can't be back here." A heavy-set man in a grease-stained chef's coat moved toward me, his jowls shaking with each step. I ignored him, moving deeper into the kitchen. My heel caught on something sticky on the floor, but I kept going. A tower of plastic containers sat near the industrial sink, and I yanked open the top one. The smell of spoiled seafood exploded outward, so powerful I gagged and stumbled backward. "I said you need to leave." The chef grabbed my elbow, his fingers digging into my skin. I jerked free and spun to face him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "How long has this been going on?" His eyes shifted left, then down at the floor. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I stepped back toward the prep station, my phone already out of my purse. The camera app opened with a tap, and I started snapping photos. The chicken with its rainbow film, the rotted lettuce, the dates on containers stacked 3 deep in the open refrigerators. Each click of the shutter felt like ammunition loading into a weapon. "Stop that right now!" The chef lunged for my phone, but I pivoted away, my shoulder bags swinging into a hanging pot rack. The metallic clang echoed through the kitchen. 2 more cooks abandoned their stations and closed in from different angles. One was tall and skeletal, with burn scars running up his forearms. The other looked barely 20, his white uniform pristine compared to everyone else's. They formed a loose semicircle, trying to box me in against the prep table. I moved left, keeping my phone raised, capturing everything. The walk-in freezer door hung partially open, frost creeping across boxes of frozen shrimp that bore no labels at all. A stack of delivery invoices sat clipped to a board on the wall, and I zoomed in on the dates, some stretching back 3 months. The math didn't add up. No way this restaurant was cycling through inventory properly. My chest felt tight, each breath shallow and quick. 15 years. I'd been eating here for 15 years, bringing friends, celebrating promotions, drowning sorrows in their miso-glazed salmon after my divorce. The memory of last week's meal rose in my throat, the slightly mushy texture of the scallops I'd dismissed as overcooked, the bitter aftertaste in the house salad I'd masked with wine. The skeletal cook made his move, darting forward to grab my wrist. I yanked back hard, and my elbow cracked against the edge of the metal prep table. Pain shot up my arm, electric and sharp, but I kept the phone gripped tight. He grabbed again, his fingernails scraping across my knuckles. "Let go!" My voice came out raw, louder than I'd intended. The young cook hung back, his face pale, eyes darting between me and the chef. His hands trembled at his sides, fingers opening and closing like he couldn't decide what to do with them. Something in his expression, fear mixed with guilt, told me he knew exactly how wrong this all was. I twisted away from the skeletal cook's grip and stumbled toward a second prep area. More horror show inventory waited there. Ground beef sat in an open container, oxidized gray-brown on top, with no covering or date marking. Beside it, opened cans of tomato paste had crusted over, their contents separated and molding. A fruit fly cemetery floated in a bus tub of dirty water. The chef caught up and positioned himself between me and the back door exit. His face had gone crimson, sweat beading across his forehead and upper lip. Behind him, I could see the dishwashing station. Mountains of plates and bowls crusted with old food, some sprouting visible mold. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Mr. Chen won't like this." The owner's name hit me like cold water. I'd met Vincent Chen dozens of times, shaken his hand, complimented his hospitality. He'd comped my meals on my birthday, sent over free appetizers, all while serving contaminated food from a kitchen that looked like a health department nightmare. I kept photographing, my fingers flying across the screen. The chef took a step closer, close enough that I could smell old fryer grease baked into his clothes. My back pressed against the industrial stove, and I felt residual heat through my blouse. The skeletal cook moved to flank me on the right, cutting off that escape route. My mind raced through options. The front door meant pushing past all 3 of them. The back exit was blocked by the chef's bulk. Windows lined the top of the far wall, but they were too high and too small. The only clear path led toward the storage area, where I could see shelving units stacked with more questionable inventory. I bolted for it, my heels clicking rapidly against the grimy tile. Someone grabbed at my jacket, fingers catching the fabric, but the material slipped free. I rounded a corner into the storage area, phone still raised, still documenting. Boxes of pasta showed water damage and possible rodent gnawing. Cans of vegetables were dented and bulging, textbook botulism risks. The storage shelves created a narrow maze, and I wove between them, my shoulder clipping a corner post that sent metal vibrating through the entire unit. Behind me, footsteps pounded, 2 sets, maybe 3. My breath came in sharp bursts as I documented everything within reach. Industrial-sized containers of mayonnaise crusted with dark residue around the lids. Meat packages with dates scratched out and rewritten. Bags of rice split open with dark droppings scattered through the grains. The smell intensified here, a nauseating cocktail of rotting produce and chemical cleaning agents that someone had clearly dumped to mask the stench. My eyes watered, but I kept the phone steady, catching a close-up of lettuce containers liquefied into brown sludge. 3 years of meals here. 3 years of bringing my colleagues, recommending this place to friends, celebrating promotions with Vincent Chen's supposedly fresh cuisine. A hand slammed against the shelf beside my head, making the entire structure shudder. I spun to find the skeletal cook blocking the path I'd just taken, his hollow cheeks pulled tight in concentration. He didn't speak, just stood there breathing through his mouth, creating a human barricade. I pivoted toward the back corner where shadows deepened, where the storage area gave way to what looked like an office entrance. My phone buzzed. Low battery warning. The screen showed 15%. I needed to get these photos uploaded, backed up somewhere beyond this building before anyone could destroy the evidence. My thumb moved in familiar patterns, opening cloud storage, selecting all recent photos. The upload icon spun, processing, while I kept moving deeper into the facility's bowels. The office door stood partially open, revealing filing cabinets and a desk buried under paperwork. I shouldered through, closing and locking it behind me, buying precious seconds. The space reeked of cigarette smoke and old coffee. Financial documents covered every surface: receipts, invoices, ledgers filled with numbers that someone had meticulously tracked. My eyes scanned for anything relevant, while my phone continued its upload crawl. 42% complete. Something crashed against the door, hard enough to rattle the frame. The handle jiggled violently. I wedged the desk chair under the knob, then turned my attention to the files. The top drawer of the nearest cabinet was unlocked, stuffed with supplier invoices. I pulled them out in handfuls, photographing each page. Dates jumped out at me. Deliveries listed weeks apart being billed as fresh daily shipments. Meat from discount liquidators marketed as premium cuts. Produce purchased from gray market wholesalers specializing in rejected goods. The door shook again. Wood splintered near the lock. 68% uploaded. My hands trembled as I moved to the next drawer, finding health inspection reports. The legitimate ones showed repeated violations going back 18 months, each followed by a passing grade issued days later after clearly fraudulent corrections. But underneath those, I found the real documents, failed inspections that had somehow never made it into the official system, stamped with unfamiliar signatures and dates that didn't align. "Open this door right now!" The chef's voice carried through the wood, accompanied by another heavy impact. The chair under the knob began to slide backward on the tile floor. I yanked open the bottom drawer, finding personnel files. Names and faces I recognized, the servers who'd brought me countless meals, smiling and attentive. Immigration documents mixed with payroll records showing wages far below minimum, hours that violated labor laws, deposits made to accounts in amounts that suggested cash payments under the table. These people were as trapped as the expired food in the walk-in, both being used until they spoiled. 87% complete. The doorframe cracked audibly. I grabbed the most damning documents, shoving them inside my jacket, against my stomach, where they pressed cold and accusatory. My reflection caught in a grimy window, wild-eyed, hair disheveled, blouse wrinkled from pressing against contaminated surfaces. I looked nothing like the composed woman who'd walked in 40 minutes ago, expecting orange chicken and pleasant conversation. The upload finished. I immediately forwarded everything to 3 different email addresses, then sent a mass text to my contact list with a single message. If anything happens to me, check cloud folder labeled evidence. My finger hovered over the send button for half a heartbeat before pressing it. The door exploded inward, the chair clattering away. The chef filled the frame, chest heaving, face dark with fury and exertion. Behind him, I caught glimpses of the other 2 and someone else, a 4th person in an expensive suit that looked wildly out of place in this nightmare kitchen. "You have no idea what you've done," the suited figure said, stepping into view. Vincent Chen looked different than I remembered from birthday dinners and friendly waves. His expression carried none of the warm hospitality I'd associated with him. Instead, his eyes tracked me with the cold calculation of someone doing complex mathematics, weighing variables, calculating losses. I pressed back against the filing cabinet, phone still clutched in my palm, its screen still glowing with my sent messages. Vincent's polished shoes clicked against the stained concrete as he moved into the cramped office. The space suddenly felt impossibly small, the walls pressing inward with each person who entered behind him. "Those emails won't matter," Vincent said, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. "You're trespassing, breaking and entering, theft of proprietary documents." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. The documents inside my jacket crinkled slightly as I straightened, refusing to shrink. Proprietary documents about food poisoning, about falsified health inspections, about bribes. The chef, I could see his name tag now, Luis, moved to block the doorway completely. His knuckles were white around the knife he still held. Behind him, the waiter had disappeared, but I could hear rapid footsteps retreating toward the dining room. Vincent adjusted his cufflinks with practiced ease. "Allegations from someone who broke into private property. Who'll believe you?" "Everyone who eats here." I held up my phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "I've got backup copies uploading to 4 separate locations. I've got timestamps. I've got before and after photos that are already sitting in journalists' inboxes." A lie, but my voice didn't waver. My pulse hammered against my throat, but I kept my shoulders squared, my stance solid. Vincent's expression flickered, just a fraction, just enough to tell me the bluff landed. He stepped closer. The cologne he wore was expensive, cloying, mixing sickeningly with the perpetual smell of rotting produce that permeated everything. "You've been a customer here for what, 12 years? You really want to destroy all of this over some dates on packages?" "Over people getting sick. Over you not caring." My voice came out harder than I intended. The memory of last week's dinner surged back, the stomach cramps, the fever that had kept me bedridden for 3 days. I'd thought it was just bad luck, just a 24-hour bug. But standing here, surrounded by evidence of systematic negligence, I felt the rage coiling tighter in my chest. Vincent's mask of composure slipped. He lunged forward, hand reaching for my phone. I twisted away, my hips slamming into the desk corner hard enough to send sparks of pain through my side. His fingers brushed my wrist, but I yanked back, stumbling toward the broken window. Luis moved fast for a big man. He crossed the office in 2 strides, positioning himself between me and the door. The knife glinted under the fluorescent light. Not threatening, not yet, but present, visible, a reminder. "Give me the phone, Gabrielle." Vincent's hand extended, palm up, fingers flexing. "We can work this out, compensation, free meals for life, whatever you want." I backed up until my shoulders hit the wall beside the window. Broken glass crunched under my shoes. The metal filing cabinet pressed cold against my left side. Vincent and Luis stood between me and the only exit, their bodies forming an impassable barrier in the cramped space. "I want you to stop poisoning people." My thumb moved across the phone screen, typing blind, muscle memory navigating to my emergency contacts. "I want health inspectors who aren't on your payroll. I want—" Vincent's hand shot out, faster than I expected for someone in his 50s. His fingers locked around my forearm with surprising strength, yanking me forward. The phone slipped in my grip, and I clutched it desperately with both hands as he tried to pry my fingers open. We struggled in the confined space, a graceless grappling match. His expensive suit jacket twisted as I threw my weight backward. My elbow connected with the filing cabinet, sending a metallic clang echoing through the office. Papers scattered from the desk, floating down around us like damning confetti. Luis hesitated in the doorway, knife lowered but still in hand, uncertain. His eyes darted between Vincent and me, clearly uncomfortable with the physical escalation but unwilling to intervene. I brought my knee up hard, catching Vincent in the thigh, not where I aimed, but enough to make him grunt and loosen his grip. I wrenched my arm free and stumbled sideways, phone still secure in my grip, my other hand reaching out to steady myself against the desk. Vincent's face had gone red, his composure completely shattered. "You sanctimonious? Do you know how many people I employ? How many families depend on this restaurant? How many people have you hospitalized?" I shot back, breathing hard, my heart slamming against my ribs. The sound of sirens cut through the tension, distant but approaching, their wail growing steadily louder. Vincent froze. Luis's head snapped toward the dining room, where the sound was clearer, unmistakable. My earlier text. Someone in my contact list had called 911. Vincent's expression transformed in an instant, shifting from rage to cold calculation. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his hair, and when he looked at me again, his face carried nothing but professional concern. "Luis, put that knife down. Miss Fisher appears to have had an episode, medical emergency." The transformation was terrifying in its completeness. Luis stared at him, confused, then slowly lowered the knife to a counter. "She broke in, clearly disoriented," Vincent continued, his voice taking on a practiced tone of worry. "Probably food poisoning from somewhere else. The poor woman's been in here destroying property, making wild accusations." We tried to calm her down. The sirens were close now, maybe a block away. Vincent moved toward the door with renewed purpose, and Luis stepped aside automatically. Before leaving, Vincent looked back at me, his eyes carrying a clear warning. "I've got lawyers who'll bury you in litigation for years. Every penny you have, and more." I lunged forward and grabbed the knife Luis had set down, my fingers wrapping around the handle slick with my own blood from where I'd gripped it earlier. The blade caught the fluorescent light as I spun toward the walk-in freezer, my shoes squeaking against the grimy tiles. Vincent's footsteps stopped. I heard him turn back. "What are you doing?" His voice carried a new edge, sharper than before. I didn't answer. My free hand wrenched open the freezer door, the rubber seal breaking with a wet, sucking sound. Arctic air blasted my face, stinging the cut on my cheek where Vincent had struck me. I stepped inside, breathing clouds of vapor, my eyes scanning the metal shelves packed with cardboard boxes and plastic containers. The sirens were right outside now, their rotating lights visible through the small window at the back of the kitchen, painting everything red and blue. The boxes nearest the door had fresh dates. This week, last week. I shoved them aside, hearing them crash to the floor behind me. My fingers were already going numb from the cold as I reached deeper, pulling out container after container. Then I found what I was looking for. A whole section at the back, partially hidden behind legitimate inventory. Boxes of chicken marked with dates from 4 months ago. Shrimp dated 6 months back. Ground beef from last July. I grabbed an armful, my muscles screaming from the earlier struggle, and stumbled back out of the freezer. Vincent stood in the doorway to the dining room, blocking my path. His perfectly composed mask had cracked, his jaw clenched tight, his manicured hands balled into white-knuckled fists. "Those are mislabeled. Simple inventory error." The pounding on the front door echoed through the restaurant. Voices shouted, official and commanding. I heard the rattle of the door handle, someone testing the lock Vincent had secured. I dumped the boxes onto the prep counter, then dove back into the freezer. My breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation burning my lungs with the sub-zero air. More boxes. Fish that looked gray and freezer-burned through the translucent plastic. Containers of sauce with visible mold colonies. A case of oysters dated from before Christmas. "Police! Open this door!" Luis had vanished. I glimpsed his shadow disappearing through the back exit, the coward abandoning his boss to face consequences alone. "Good. Let him run." I hauled out another armload, my biceps trembling, the knife still clutched in one hand because I wasn't stupid enough to let it go while Vincent stood there watching. The prep counter overflowed with evidence now. Dozens of containers, all expired, all dated months or even years old. My phone was still recording from where it had fallen earlier. The screen cracked, but the camera lens intact. The red recording light still blinking. I'd positioned it perfectly without meaning to. It had captured everything from Vincent's assault to this moment. Vincent moved toward me, his expensive shoes crunching over broken glass. I raised the knife, my hand steady despite everything. The blade pointed directly at his chest. He stopped 3 feet away. "You've destroyed your life tonight," he said quietly. "My lawyers will take everything." The front door splintered. Wood cracked, hinges shrieked, and suddenly the dining room filled with heavy footsteps and urgent voices. Flashlight beams swept across walls, illuminating the destruction. Overturned tables, scattered papers, the chaos of our confrontation. "In here!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Kitchen!" 3 officers burst through the doorway, hands on their holsters, eyes taking in the scene with trained efficiency. Vincent's transformation was instant and complete once more. His shoulders sagged, his expression shifted to concern and confusion. He raised his palms in a gesture of helpless bewilderment. "Thank God you're here," he began. "This woman broke into my—" "Save it," I interrupted, pointing the knife at the mountain of expired food covering the counter. "Check the dates on those containers, every single one. Then check the walk-in freezer. There's more, months worth." One officer moved toward me, speaking in low, calm tones. "Ma'am, I need you to put down the knife." I looked at the blade in my hand, surprised to see it still there. My fingers had gone numb, locked in place. I set it down carefully on the counter, my hand leaving a smear of blood on the stainless steel. The officer guided me backward, away from Vincent, away from the evidence I'd risked everything to expose. Another officer was already examining the boxes, pulling containers closer, reading dates aloud to his partner. His voice grew sharper with each one he checked. The third officer had moved to block Vincent's path to any exit. The officer examining the containers pulled out his phone, snapping photographs of label after label. His jaw tightened with each click. I leaned against the counter, watching Vincent's performance falter as the evidence mounted around him. Sweat beaded on his upper lip. His hands, so steady when holding that bat, now trembled at his sides. "This chicken expired 4 months ago," the officer said, holding up a plastic container. "This beef, Jesus, 6 months, and this sauce looks like it's from last year." My legs threatened to give out. I pressed my palms flat against the cool stainless steel, willing myself to stay upright. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was draining away, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion and a throbbing pain in my ribs where Vincent's kick had landed. The officer who'd taken my knife guided me to a chair someone had righted. I sank into it, my lungs burning with each breath. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see more uniformed figures arriving, their radios crackling with static and urgent voices. The restaurant I'd loved for 15 years was becoming a crime scene. Vincent tried moving toward the back door. The blocking officer stepped sideways, cutting off his path without a word. Vincent froze, his eyes darting around the kitchen like a trapped animal searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "I can explain," Vincent started, but his voice lacked conviction. "There was a mix-up with inventory. I was going to dispose of all this tomorrow. I had no idea." "You knew." The words scraped from my throat, raw and harsh. Blood had dried on my chin, tight and itchy. "You served that expired chicken to me 3 days ago. Made me so sick I couldn't work, couldn't eat, thought I was dying." The photographing officer stopped mid-click, turning to look at me fully for the first time. His expression hardened. He pulled out a small notepad, flipping it open with quick, practiced movements. "Ma'am, did you receive medical treatment for this illness?" I nodded, immediately regretting the motion as pain lanced through my skull. "Emergency room." "Sunday night. They said it was severe food poisoning. Kept me overnight on IV fluids." Vincent's face went gray. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish drowning in air. The officer blocking his path now had one hand resting casually on his belt near the handcuffs clipped there. More footsteps thundered through the dining room. A woman in a dark suit appeared in the doorway, holding up credentials in a leather wallet. Her eyes swept the kitchen with the same efficiency as the first responders, but her focus was sharper, more analytical. "Detective Morrison," she announced. "Who's the owner?" Vincent raised a shaking hand, the detective's gaze fixed on him with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. She moved deeper into the kitchen, her low heels clicking against the tile floor. She stopped at the counter, surveying the mountain of expired food, with an expression that could have frozen water. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her voice flat and professional. Vincent's mouth worked silently. I watched him struggle to construct another lie, another manipulation. But the evidence surrounded him, damning and irrefutable. Boxes upon boxes of food that should have been destroyed months ago. Food he'd served to unsuspecting customers. Food he'd served to me. "Start checking the walk-in," Detective Morrison said to the officer with the camera. "Document everything. Every single container, every date, every violation." The officer moved past Vincent, who stumbled backward against a prep station. His expensive shirt was wrinkled now, untucked, stained with sweat. The transformation from smooth restaurateur to cornered criminal was almost complete. I pressed a hand to my ribs, probing gently. The pain suggested bruising, maybe a crack, but nothing felt obviously broken. My jaw ached where Vincent's fist had connected. My fingers were stiff from gripping the knife so tightly for so long. Every part of my body screamed its catalog of injuries. Detective Morrison crouched beside my chair, bringing her face level with mine. Up close, I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the gray threading through her dark hair. She'd seen things, done this job long enough to recognize truth when she saw it. "You need medical attention," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "I need to see this through first." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Paramedics are outside. They'll wait." She stood, pulling latex gloves from her jacket pocket. "Tell me about the food poisoning. Everything you remember." I walked her through those terrible 48 hours. The chicken pasta I'd ordered Thursday night, creamy and rich, my favorite dish. How the cramping started 6 hours later. The violent vomiting that left me empty and still heaving. The fever that climbed so high I'd hallucinated shadows moving across my bedroom walls. The weakness that made standing feel like climbing mountains. Detective Morrison's pen moved steadily across her notepad. Behind her, officers were now carrying boxes from the walk-in freezer, adding them to the growing pile of evidence. Each container they brought out tightened the noose around Vincent's neck a little more. "Expiration date from 14 months ago," an officer called out, holding up a bag of shrimp. The plastic was cloudy, the contents inside a suspicious gray-green color. My stomach lurched. How many people had eaten Vincent's expired food? How many had gotten sick like me? How many had dismissed it as a stomach bug, never knowing they'd been poisoned by negligence and greed? Vincent slumped against the wall, his face buried in his hands. The fight had gone out of him completely. Detective Morrison approached him with deliberate steps, her handcuffs already unclipped and ready. Story block 7. I watched the handcuffs click around Vincent's wrists, the metallic sound echoing through the kitchen like a period at the end of a sentence. He didn't resist. His shoulders sagged forward as Detective Morrison recited his rights in that practiced monotone cops must learn at the academy. The words washed over me, familiar from television but surreal in real life. My legs trembled beneath me, adrenaline finally draining from my system now that the confrontation had reached its conclusion. I gripped the stainless steel counter for support, my palms leaving sweaty prints on the polished surface. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, suddenly too bright, making spots dance across my vision. An officer escorted Vincent past me toward the exit. He lifted his head for just a moment, meeting my eyes. I expected anger or hatred, or at least defiance. Instead, I saw only exhaustion and something that might have been shame. Then he was gone, disappearing through the swinging doors that led to the dining room. Detective Morrison approached me with measured steps, tucking her notepad into her jacket pocket. She placed one hand on my shoulder, steadying me when my knees buckled slightly. "The paramedics need to check you out. No arguments?" I nodded, too drained to protest. My chest still ached from the earlier tackle, and now that the confrontation had ended, I became aware of a dozen other pains. My ribs throbbed where I'd hit the floor. My wrist felt swollen, probably twisted during the struggle. The base of my skull pounded with a headache that felt like someone had driven nails into my temples. She guided me through the kitchen, past the evidence boxes and photographing officers, out into the alley where 2 paramedics waited beside their ambulance. The afternoon sun hit me like a physical force after the dim kitchen. I squinted against the brightness, raising one hand to shield my eyes. The younger paramedic, a Latino man with kind eyes and careful hands, gestured toward the open ambulance doors. I climbed in, each step sending jarring pain through my chest cavity. He pulled out equipment from organized drawers, his movements efficient and practiced. The blood pressure cuff tightened around my upper arm, constricting until it hurt. Numbers beeped on a small monitor, He wrapped cold fingers around my wrist, checking my pulse manually while counting silently. His partner, an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, shone a penlight in my eyes, making me follow the beam left and right. "Elevated heart rate," the man said, recording numbers on a clipboard. "Blood pressure's high too, but that's expected given the circumstances." The woman pressed her fingers along my ribcage, watching my face for reactions. I hissed when she found the tender spots, fire shooting through my chest wall. She made notes, then pulled out a stethoscope, the cold metal circle shocking against my back, even through my shirt. "Deep breath," she instructed. I inhaled slowly, feeling the air expand my lungs. Pain sparked along my right side, sharp enough to make me gasp. She moved the stethoscope, listening intently, her expression neutral and professional. "Possible bruised ribs, maybe cracked. You need X-rays to be certain." She pulled back, looping the stethoscope around her neck. "Hospital would be the smart choice." I shook my head before she finished speaking. The thought of sitting in an emergency room for hours, answering questions, filling out forms, it felt impossible. My apartment was 12 blocks away. My bed, my bathroom, my sanctuary. That's what I needed. "I'll go tomorrow if it's not better." The woman exchanged glances with her partner. He shrugged, pulling out paperwork. "We need you to sign a refusal of treatment form. Against medical advice and all that." I scrawled my signature across the bottom of the document, my handwriting shaky and barely legible. The pen trembled in my grip, my hand refusing to stay steady. He tore off a yellow copy and pressed it into my palm. Detective Morrison appeared at the ambulance doors, her phone pressed to her ear. She covered the microphone with one hand. "Health Department sending inspectors within the hour. This place is getting shut down pending investigation." The finality in her voice should have brought satisfaction. Instead, I felt hollowed out, empty in a way that had nothing to do with physical hunger. Bella Notte had been my refuge for 3 years. Every Thursday night like clockwork, my little routine, my familiar comfort in an unpredictable world. Now it was contaminated, ruined, transformed into a crime scene. I climbed down from the ambulance, my feet landing heavily on the asphalt. My car was still parked on the street out front, assuming they hadn't towed it. I started walking toward the mouth of the alley, each step deliberate and measured. "Gabrielle, wait." Detective Morrison jogged to catch up, slightly out of breath. She held out a business card, her contact information printed in neat black letters. "Call me if you remember anything else, and seriously, get those ribs checked." I pocketed the card and continued walking, emerging onto the main street. My silver Honda sat exactly where I'd left it, a parking ticket fluttering under the windshield wiper. I pulled it free and stuffed it in my jacket pocket. One more problem for future me to handle. The drive home passed in a blur of traffic lights and honking horns. My hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, knuckles white, forearms aching from the tension. Every pothole sent fresh waves of pain through my chest. Every brake tap made my ribs scream in protest. I pulled into my apartment complex as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and angry red. My body moved on autopilot, extracting keys from my pocket, locking the car door, shuffling toward the building entrance. Each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. The elevator was out of order again. Of course it was. I stared at the handwritten sign taped to the doors, then at the stairwell entrance. 5 flights. Might as well be Mount Everest. I took the first step, then the second. My right hand gripped the railing so hard my palm burned. By the 3rd floor, sweat dripped down my temples despite the building's perpetual chill. By the 4th, I had to stop, leaning against the concrete wall, breathing in shallow gasps that sent electricity shooting through my torso. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out with trembling fingers. A text from my sister. "Dinner Sunday? Marcus is making his famous ribs." The word ribs made my stomach lurch. I shoved the phone back in my pocket and forced myself up the final flight. My apartment door stuck as usual, requiring a shoulder shove to open. The familiar screech of wood on warped frame announced my arrival to no one. The space beyond was dark, silent, exactly as I'd left it that morning, a lifetime ago. I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. I tried again, flicking it up and down repeatedly. The bulb must have burned out. I felt my way along the wall to the kitchen, found the drawer where I kept spare bulbs, knocked over something that shattered on the linoleum. Damn it. My voice cracked in the darkness. I stood perfectly still, listening to my own ragged breathing, feeling the walls press in from all sides. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too airless, too much like a coffin. I abandoned the broken glass and stumbled to the bedroom, not bothering to turn on that light either. My bed called to me, promising oblivion, escape from the day's horrors. I collapsed onto it fully clothed, not even removing my shoes. Sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that walk-in freezer, the green fuzzed chicken, the bloated packaging. Vincent's face, that smug smile transforming into panic when I'd grabbed the meat hook. My phone buzzed again, then again, and again. I pulled it out, squinting at the sudden brightness. Social media notifications. The story had already leaked somehow. Local news accounts were posting about beloved Italian restaurant under investigation for health violations. The comments sections exploded with reactions. "I ate there last week and got sick. My cousin works there and said it was always sketchy. This is why I only cook at home." I scrolled through them, each comment fueling something hot and volatile in my chest. More texts came in, friends asking if I was okay. Acquaintances who barely remembered my name suddenly concerned. My inbox filled with unread messages. I turned the phone off completely and threw it across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying thunk and clattered to the floor. The darkness pressed closer. My ribs throbbed in time with my heartbeat. I rolled onto my side, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. There wasn't one. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, heavy and deliberate. They stopped at my door. I held my breath, waiting. A shadow moved in the gap beneath the door, blocking the ambient light from the hallway. Someone was standing right outside. My body went rigid. I stared at that shadow, watching it shift slightly. A full minute passed, maybe 2. Then the footsteps resumed, moving away down the corridor. I exhaled slowly, my heart hammering against my injured ribs. Just a neighbor, had to be. But the paranoia wouldn't release its grip. Vincent knew where I lived. It was on file at the restaurant for tax purposes, emergency contact information. He'd seen me at my weakest moment, seen what I was capable of when pushed. I forced myself to stand, to cross the room to the door. I checked the deadbolt, locked. I engaged the chain lock too, then wedged a chair under the doorknob for good measure. My hands shook as I worked, adrenaline flooding my system despite my body's exhaustion. Back in the bedroom, I retrieved my phone from where it had fallen. The screen was cracked, but still functional. I powered it back on and pulled up Detective Morrison's contact information. My thumb hovered over the call button. What would I even say? That I heard footsteps in my own apartment building? That I was scared of shadows? She'd think I was hysterical, unstable, a liability to her investigation. I set the phone on the nightstand instead and opened the drawer. The pepper spray I'd bought years ago after a near mugging sat unused in the back, along with a small folding knife. I pulled them both out and placed them next to the phone, just within reach. The night stretched ahead, endless and threatening. I lay back down, fully alert now, every nerve ending firing. Outside my window, sirens wailed in the distance. Car alarms shrieked. The city's nighttime symphony played on, indifferent to my terror. My eyes fixed on the ceiling, tracing the familiar water stain that looked like a twisted face. Hours passed. The pain in my ribs became a constant companion, a reminder that this was real, that today had actually happened, that my safe little world had crumbled in the span of an afternoon. Somewhere around 3 a.m, exhaustion finally won. I drifted into fitful sleep, plagued by dreams of rotting meat and Vincent's laughter echoing through endless freezers. The morning light felt like an assault. I rolled over, every muscle in my body protesting the movement. The ribs screamed their displeasure. I dragged myself upright, catching sight of my reflection in the dresser mirror. Purple and yellow bruises bloomed across my collarbone, and my eye had swollen nearly shut. Coffee. I needed coffee before I could face whatever today would bring. The kitchen seemed different in daylight, less ominous. I filled the pot with shaking hands and waited for it to brew, leaning against the counter. My phone buzzed. Detective Morrison's name flashed across the cracked screen. "Vincent Chen is in custody," she said when I answered. "We raided the restaurant at dawn, found enough evidence to keep him locked up for years." The words washed over me, but I felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction, just hollow exhaustion. "The health department is involved now. They've shut down Lotus Garden permanently. Found violations dating back 18 months. I thanked her and ended the call. The coffee maker beeped. I poured a cup and moved to the window, looking down at the street below. People hurried past, clutching briefcases and shopping bags, their lives untouched by mine, their routines intact while mine lay shattered. The next 3 days blurred together. I called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in 8 years. My supervisor sounded concerned, but didn't press for details. I spent the hours alternating between ice packs and heating pads, watching mindless television, avoiding the news coverage about the restaurant scandal. On the 4th morning, I forced myself to shower and dress. The bruises had faded to greenish yellow, less dramatic, but still visible. I covered what I could with makeup and headed outside for the first time since the attack. The walk to the corner store took twice as long as usual. I moved carefully, protecting my ribs. Inside, I grabbed essentials: bread, eggs, orange juice. At the register, the clerk was watching a news report on the small television mounted above the counter. "Crazy, right?" He nodded toward the screen. "That restaurant poisoned half the neighborhood." I handed him cash without responding. My hands were steady now. Outside, I turned left instead of right, walking the 4 blocks to where Lotus Garden had stood. Yellow tape crisscrossed the entrance. A notice from the health department covered the front door, listing violations in bureaucratic language. The window where I'd always admired the decorative lanterns was dark. I stood there for 15 minutes, just staring. A woman approached from my left, mid-60s, leaning heavily on a cane. She stopped beside me. "My husband got sick from their food last month," she said quietly. "Spent a week in the hospital. I kept telling myself it was just bad luck." We didn't look at each other, both of us fixed on the darkened restaurant. "I'm glad someone finally said something," she continued. Then she walked away, her cane tapping against the sidewalk. The weight in my chest shifted just slightly. I turned and headed home. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. The cursor blinked in the empty email field. I typed Detective Morrison's address from memory, then started writing. Not about Vincent or the attack. That was over. Instead, I detailed 3 other restaurants I'd noticed over the past year. Places where something had felt wrong, but I'd dismissed my instincts. Strange smells, questionable practices glimpsed through kitchen doors. Staff who looked too nervous when questioned. I wasn't sure if anything would come of it. Maybe all 3 were legitimate. Maybe my suspicion was just paranoia now. But I attached photos I'd taken during my food blog days, added addresses and dates, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. The next morning, I called my supervisor. "I need to come back," I said. "Tomorrow." She asked if I was ready. I told her I was. At the office, my colleagues had clearly heard something. They kept their distance, offered sympathetic smiles, asked no questions. I appreciated the space. My desk felt foreign at first, all those familiar spreadsheets and reports suddenly meaningless. But I opened the first file and began working, letting the routine pull me forward. Lunch hour arrived. Usually I'd walk to one of my regular spots, places I'd reviewed positively, places I'd trusted. Instead, I pulled out the sandwich I'd made that morning, turkey and Swiss on wheat bread from my own kitchen. I'd watched every ingredient go in, controlled every variable. Story block. 10:10. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment. Sunlight streamed through windows I'd positioned specifically to watch the food prep area. My own kitchen, where every surface gleamed under my careful maintenance. I chopped vegetables on a bamboo cutting board, the knife moving in steady rhythms while steam rose from a pot of homemade broth on the stove. The scent of garlic and thyme filled the space, each ingredient selected personally from the farmer's market that morning. My phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands and picked it up, scanning the message from Detective Morrison. 2 more restaurants had been shut down following my tips. One for rodent infestation, another for falsifying temperature logs. The health department had expanded their random inspection programs citywide. 43 establishments had received violations in the past month alone. I set the phone down and returned to my vegetables, sliding diced carrots into the pot. My blog had transformed into something unexpected. Instead of reviews praising hidden gems, I now published detailed guides on food safety, taught readers how to spot warning signs, interviewed health inspectors and former restaurant workers who'd witnessed violations. The follower count had tripled. People sent me tips daily, asking me to investigate places in their neighborhoods. The doorbell rang. I checked the security camera I'd installed, another new habit, and saw Paulina standing outside holding a covered dish. I'd met her at a community meeting 3 months ago, recognized the wariness in her eyes that mirrored my own. She'd gotten food poisoning from a catering company at her daughter's wedding. We'd started cooking together on weekends, sharing recipes and ingredients we could verify. I opened the door and she stepped inside, bringing the smell of fresh bread. "Sourdough," she said, pulling back the cloth. "Made the starter myself from scratch." "Perfect timing," I replied, gesturing toward the stove. "Soup's almost ready." We moved through my kitchen in comfortable silence, her slicing bread while I ladled soup into bowls. No small talk about restaurants we should try, no suggestions for new places. We'd both learned to find satisfaction in meals we could trust completely. My laptop sat open on the dining table, displaying the draft of my next blog post. I'd spent the morning writing about supply chain transparency, interviewing local farmers who sold directly to consumers. The post included photos of my visits to their operations, detailed notes about their practices, contact information for readers who wanted to connect directly with food sources they could verify. Paulina read over my shoulder while we ate, nodding at certain passages. "You're making a difference," she said, tearing off a piece of bread. I thought about Vincent in prison, about Lucia's gratitude, about the 2 restaurants that had reopened under new management after implementing every safety protocol I'd suggested in my articles. I thought about the cooking classes I'd started teaching from this apartment, showing others how to prepare meals without relying on establishments they couldn't verify. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'm just less afraid now." After Paulina left, I cleaned the kitchen with methodical precision, checking expiration dates on everything in my refrigerator, wiping down surfaces, organizing my pantry so I could see every item clearly. The routines that once felt like paranoia now felt like power, control I'd claimed back through knowledge and action. I opened my laptop and checked the blog comments. Hundreds of people sharing their own stories, asking questions, supporting each other. Someone had posted about a suspicious buffet in their area. 3 others had already responded with photos and details, building a case before involving authorities. I smiled and began typing my response, my fingers moving across the keys with the same steady confidence I'd found in my kitchen knife work. The cursor blinked in the comment box, waiting for my contribution. I'd become part of something larger than my own trauma, a community of people refusing to be victimized by negligence and greed. The sun shifted lower outside my windows, casting golden light across my apartment. Tomorrow, I'd visit another farmer's market, then meet with a health inspector who wanted to be interviewed for my podcast. Next week, I'd been invited to speak at a food safety conference. The calendar on my wall showed every commitment marked clearly, every meal planned and prepared in advance. I closed the laptop and walked to my window, looking down at the street below where restaurants lined the sidewalk. Some had improved their practices because of attention my blog brought. Others had closed permanently. The neighborhood had changed, and I'd changed with it. Not broken by what happened, but rebuilt into someone stronger, more purposeful, more determined to prevent others from experiencing what I had endured. My reflection stared back at me from the darkening glass. I met my own eyes and saw someone who'd transformed pain into action, fear into vigilance, trauma into a mission that mattered. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.